This morning, President Trump's high-stakes trip through Asia has brought him to Japan. But all eyes are on what's happening between the U.S. and China, actually, the world's second largest economy, now that the two sides appear to be on the brink of a trade deal that could avoid new tariffs. Just days before President Trump is set to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping in South Korea, the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, announced what he described as a substantial framework for that agreement, which includes provisions, they say, on fentanyl, China purchasing U.S. soybeans once again, rare earth exports coming out of China, and the ownership of TikTok. Aboard Air Force One, the president expressed high hopes about closing the deal.
We have China coming, and it's going to be very interesting. I have a lot of respect for President Xi, and we are going to, I think we're going to come away with a deal.
CNN's Kristen Holmes live in Tokyo for us right now. What more are you learning about this framework, Kristen?
Yeah, I mean, Kate, everything we know either comes from Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent or his Chinese counterpart, and it doesn't all 100% line up. We haven't seen any kind of paperwork, any kind of actual framework. It's just snippets here and there. Scott Bessent has sounded incredibly bullish, whereas his Chinese counterpart sounded more reserved. Now, that's to be expected, but here's what we believe to be in this framework. One, when you talk about fentanyl, a further cooperation on stemming the flow of fentanyl into the U.S. Now, as you mentioned, soybeans, which is a huge issue in America, particularly for American farmers. China would buy a, quote, substantial amount of U.S. soybeans. China could delay export controls on rare earth minerals. This is what we heard from Bessent, that he expected some kind of deferral, possibly even up to a year. And just a reminder, Kate, that export control, that is what actually triggered President Trump to announce that November 1st they would have these 100% tariffs, which Bessent said essentially now no longer exist. So we're back to the drawing board on both of those, with a deferral on rare earths as well as this no 100% on tariffs. And then lastly, this finalizing of the deal on TikTok ownership, transferring that ownership to the United States. Bessent essentially said that was a done deal, only for the leaders to sign off on. The rest of this seems to be there's still a negotiation around it.
And Kristen, also, so there's a lot more to come on that, but also, what's the update on the president's health? Speaking to reporters on the way over, talking about getting an MRI.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of a stunning moment. President Trump was asked specifically if he had gotten an MRI during his recent visit to Walter Reed. We know he had gotten, quote unquote, advanced imaging. That's what his doctor's note had said. And we even asked the press secretary the other day what advanced imaging was. She said she didn't know. He bluntly answered yes, that he had an MRI. Now, he didn't answer why he got an MRI scan or what it was for exactly. But of course, in President Trump fashion, he said that it was great results, perfect results, that he went through the machine and it was all perfect. And then he went on to say, you have all this information, which of course we do not have. This was all news that he had gotten this MRI. So we've reached out to the White House to see if there are any other details that they're willing to provide on this MRI, what it was of, why he needed to get it. So far, radio silence.
We shall see. It's good to see you, Kristen. Thank you so much. Sarah.
All right. Soon after touching down in Tokyo, the president met with Japan's Emperor at the Imperial Palace. Tomorrow, he's set to hold talks with Japan's first female prime minister, Sanae Takaichi. This will be Takaichi's debut on the global stage, with billions of dollars in trade and defense commitments with the United States on the table. CNN's Hanako Montgomery is live in Tokyo for us. Can you set the stage for this critical meeting and how you see this will play out?
Hi, Sarah. It's good to see you. So we're largely expecting the two leaders to get along pretty well. They're both conservatives. They're both quite nationalistic, and they share a lot of the same personal and political values. So again, from the Japanese side, we are expecting Trump and Takaichi to get along well during their very first official bilateral summit. Now, sources tell me that Takaichi will likely lean into her close personal relationship that she shared with the former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Now, Abe was very close to Trump. The two leaders leaders played many rounds of golf together. They enjoyed Japanese culture together. They fed koi fish together at one point. So again, very colorful relationship. And Takaichi will likely be trying to emulate that with Trump because, again, this is a very uncertain time for U.S.-Japan alliance, and especially when it comes to trade. So Takaichi will do her very best to really just have a good relationship with Trump, try to get as close to Trump as possible. Now, sources tell me that Takaichi will likely try to do that by gifting Trump golden golf balls and also a golf putter and really a golf club that Trump used when he used to play golf with the former Japanese prime minister. So again, engaging in golf diplomacy to try to get closer to the U.S. president. But there are some potential roadblocks ahead for the U.S.-Japan alliance, especially when it comes to trade. The U.S. and Japan do have a tariff agreement, but there are some questions about this $550 billion investment deal that Japan has pledged to. Now, this is a huge sum for Japan. It's actually more than a tenth of Japan's entire annual economy. But Japan still doesn't know where that money will go, how that will be invested. So during this bilateral summit, we are expecting both leaders to try to iron out some of those details, especially, again, because this tariff war has been continuing for so long. Sarah.
Yeah, Hanako Montgomery, thank you. Great reporting there from Tokyo for us.
Joining me right now is Jeff Moon. He's a former assistant U.S. trade representative regarding China affairs in the Obama administration. It's good to see you, Jeff. Thank you so much for being here. Let's look ahead to what really are the most important trade talks of them all with China coming later this week. The way that the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, described it from his conversations leading up to this is he said, I think we've reached a substantial framework for the two leaders who will meet next Thursday. The way the Chinese are talking about it, and Chinese state media has said that the U.S. and China have reached a preliminary consensus on how to address respective concerns, and also adding in a readout, both sides agreed to further finalize the specific details and fulfill their respective domestic approval processes. You read that and you hear what about where things stand right now in these critical talks?
I think they're almost there, but certainly they're going to have to get the leaders to give final approval for all the details. And the statements here are very interesting because there's been a history during the Trump 2 administration of different statements from the U.S. and from China. The U.S. has tended to talk about significant concrete achievements, while the Chinese have talked more about agreement in principle or a consensus or a framework. And then immediately after those statements have been issued, disagreements have erupted. So we seem to be repeating the similar pattern where there is nothing written out there and there are verbal assessments of what happens, and then we move on and may or may not actually resolve the issues.
One central and key part about this is where things head, how things free up, what are the agreements around rare earths. Bessent said on NBC that he anticipates the United States is going to get some kind of deferral on rare earth export controls. Is some kind of deferral, if you're looking at a year even on export controls, is that a win, Jeff? I mean, how big of a concession is that on the part of the Chinese?
Well, the most contentious issues right now are rare earths and U.S. tech export controls. And so to get some kind of relief, at least for a year, is useful. However, that's not a permanent solution to the problem of China controlling 90% of the world's rare earths and threatening to weaponize that against the entire global electronic supply chain. And even if they agree to defer for a year, that could be reversed as quickly as Trump reverses his mind on tariff levels, that he imposes on other countries. So yes, that would be positive news, but that does not resolve all the issues.
That's a great point. And when you point out, which is important to remind folks, that China controls more than 90% of global output of when you're talking about rare earths and controls basically 100% of kind of the key categories of rare earths that are needed in the most cutting edge technologies. How much leverage do you think the United States really has going into these talks, especially around this central issue?
Well, the U.S. has lots of leverage. We have tariffs. And despite the talk in Washington that some people want to decouple, we can't decouple. We both need things from each other. The Chinese want our technology. They want our aircraft technology and other things that Trump mentions, software to design semiconductors. Both sides want to cooperate with each other, but geopolitically, it's very difficult to do and extremely volatile.
How do you, in your decades of experience, how are you going to be evaluating what really is like what is success and what falls short of success, do you think, from both sides? What are you looking for?
Success is some form of détente. I think we really have had an erratic period here, threats, counter threats, instability, causing fluctuations in the stock market. That's not useful to anybody. They need to reach some kind of understanding, starting with those two key issues, the two key issues of rare earths and probably tech export controls. And then I think what we're probably going to get is some selected transactional agreements that Besson has been referencing in his press comments, things like fentanyl, soybeans, port fees, TikTok. Those sorts of things, I think, are the easy things that they can do without really getting into deep geopolitical issues.
Jeff Moon, great to have you in here. Thank you so much.